with in the future. That's how the president-elect described President Obama when the two rivals met shortly after the election. But now there's a bit of a change in tone for Donald Trump. He's taking aim at the president on Twitter for the second time in less than 24 hours. Now saying the idea of a so-called smooth transition of power may now be a thing of the past. Let's talk about this, among other topics. Lynn Sweet, Washington Bureau Chief for the Chicago Sun-Times, joining us, and Paul Singer, Washington correspondent for USA Today. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, Lynn, I want to start with you. Is this idea of a smooth transition now out the door?
Well, things can change. I take President-elect Trump's Twitter at its face value. He doesn't think it's going well. Maybe tomorrow will bring a new day and he'll change his mind. What is different here and unprecedented, to use the name of a CNN book, is that there is an unusual amount of reaction from President-elect Trump to the last weeks of the Obama administration. That's unusual, but what hasn't been unusual in this whole election cycle? So today, President-elect Trump says things are not going well. Maybe some things will happen in the next few days where he will judge what's going on in a different light. The other thing is, I believe he's commenting at the very most public parts of the transition. There are still landing teams that his team has at the different Obama agencies. So there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that is still going on in a very businesslike transfer of government way.
Your transfer is multifaceted from the transition, I should say. Paul, let me come to you. I went back and tried to find out if this is indeed unprecedented. What the president said during his interview with David Axelrod on that Axe Files podcast, saying that he would have, he thinks, won against Donald Trump, and it isn't. Bill Clinton said the same thing about George W. Bush, but we're seeing what seems to be this personal sensitivity from Donald Trump, the idea that the president would say this about potentially winning against him in a general election.
And this will be interesting to watch when Donald Trump becomes the president of the United States. Will he still respond in such a sort of personal and public way to every slight that he sees on Twitter or on cable news? I mean, I think what we've seen so far during this period is that the fact of the matter is things that Donald Trump said about people on Twitter 6 months ago or even 3 weeks ago no longer really matter when he sits down and talks to them face to face. They have very nice relationships. In fact, he had said very hostile things about Barack Obama shortly before the election, and then they sat down in the White House a couple weeks later and got along famously. So I'm not sure how much we should read into his Twitter account. The question is going to become, when he's president of the United States, does he sort of step back and say, I don't need to comment on everything that's going on in front of us?
Yeah, let's step away from the tweets for a moment and talk about some choices that are being made for the Trump administration. The selection of Tom Bossert to be his Homeland Security advisor, who was picked from the Bush administration, who was a top aide to then President George W. Bush. Let's revisit what Donald Trump said during the campaign about the Bush administration, their execution of the war in Iraq, and their handling of national security.
The war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake. George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty. They lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none. And I think the Bushes are fine, but he can't lie about his brother's record.
And he's had the gall to go after
the World Trade Center came down during
the
his brother's reign.
My mother.
Remember that.
Hold on. Let me finish.
That's not keeping us safe.
So, Lynn, with that as context, what's the strategy here from the Trump perspective of choosing Tom Bossert to be on his national security team?
Well, I don't think that it appears that Trump has criticism of the presidency of George W. Bush, but not necessarily of everyone who served in the administration. As was just mentioned in the graphic, he has a cybersecurity expertise, and that's very important to U.S. security in the coming years. That might have been an appeal. It is very traditional for the people who have served in prior administrations to get hired when there's a new one, meaning that President Obama ran against Hillary Clinton, but many people who served in 2008, and many people who served in the White House ended up in the Obama White House. There's only so many people that really have expertise in running some of these government agencies, and you certainly will have many new people with different perspectives and experience, but I see no bigger story to read into this one than they're looking for somebody here who has some subject matter expertise, notwithstanding the criticisms that Trump heaped on former President Bush.
Which made the challenge, made the promise of draining the swamp a challenge from the beginning, because you have such a small pool to pull from.
Though I don't know if they meant, if Trump meant, maybe I'm reading between the lines here, I don't know if he meant necessarily subject matter experts as opposed to big money people, Wall Street people, Goldman Sachs.
All right.
That might be more of the reference.
Let me come to you. What does this tell us about how the Trump administration will be run? You have now this voice that many on Capitol Hill, Republicans, find reassuring with Tom Bossert over their concerns of General Flynn, the National Security Advisor, just like you have on one side, you have potentially Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon on the other, with Chief Advisor, Political Advisor, and the Chief of Staff. What does this tell us about how he'll run his White House?
Well, you should make note of the fact as well that Trump promoted this Bossert position before he named Bossert to it. That is to say, Bossert's position previously, this Homeland Security Advisor, was a deputy to the National Security Advisor. That's not going to be true in the Trump administration. This position has been promoted, and it's now an equivalent position to the National Security Advisor. What that suggests is that they are taking very seriously his subject matter expertise, and perhaps, in fact, they are trying to assuage some of the concerns of people who were concerned that Mr. Flynn was a little too unsteady. This appears to be a professional with a lot of subject matter experience who will now have significant independent authority, independent of Michael Flynn.
All right, Paul Singer, Lynn Sweet, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for this time.
All right, coming up, may the force be with you, Carrie Fisher. And fans are mourning the loss of the iconic actress, author, and advocate.